I was about to turn off the lights when I heard my name whispered from the living room. She doesn't need to know. Lucille's heart won't take it. My daughter-in-law's voice cut through the silence like a blade. I froze. What truth was too heavy for me to bear? The next morning, I opened my granddaughter's old toy box and found a sealed letter, written by my son years after his death. After David passed, the house fell into a kind of silence that didn't feel peaceful. It felt hollow. You could hear the refrigerator hum from across the room, the creak of old floorboards when the wind changed. Marissa, my daughter-in-law, moved through it like a ghost on autopilot, packing lunches, answering emails, smiling when Emily asked questions. I tried to fill the gaps the only way I knew how. Watering the plants, baking too much, humming songs no one remembered. Every evening, we ate dinner together. 3 plates, 1 chair that stayed empty. Marissa would light a candle for David, but never look at it. Emily, only 8, would chatter about school, and I'd nod, pretending my chest wasn't tightening every time she said Dad used to. Grief has its own rhythm. First you count days, then seasons. But there was something off about this one, like the house itself was holding its breath. Sometimes at night, I'd find Marissa on the porch, phone glowing in her hand. When she noticed me, she'd lock the screen too quickly. "Just work stuff, Mom," she'd say. The word mom always sounded rehearsed. I told myself not to pry. After losing David, I clung to one fragile rule: keep the peace. Keep what's left. But the quiet was starting to feel less like peace and more like denial. I'd go into David's old study to dust the shelves. His cologne still lingered on the books he never finished reading. The photo of him holding Emily at the hospital was still crooked on the wall. He looked tired but happy. That photo used to comfort me. Now it whispered questions I couldn't answer. Why did my son die so suddenly? Why did no one ever tell me what really happened that night? One afternoon, while Emily napped, I sat at the kitchen table and unfolded the letter I'd found, hidden inside her stuffed bear. My hands trembled just reading the first line. "Mom, if you ever read this, it means I never made it back." My breath caught. The ink was smudged near his name, as if written in a hurry, or fear. I read those words again and again, each time feeling them carve deeper. He had known. I wanted to keep reading. But the letter stopped mid-sentence, like someone had ripped the rest away. My heart begged for the ending, but maybe the ending was something I wasn't meant to see. For days, I carried that folded paper in my pocket, pretending it was nothing. I cooked, cleaned, smiled for Emily. But every time Marissa walked into the room, the air changed. I could feel the space between us tighten, like we both knew a truth neither dared to speak. At church, people would still call me the strong one. They'd say, "You must be proud of how Marissa's holding up." I'd smile, nod, and wish someone would look closer. Strong isn't what I felt. It was what I wore. One night, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. I looked older than I remembered. My son's letter was still in my hand. I whispered, "What, didn't you make it back from David?" The house didn't answer. Just the slow tick of the clock on the mantel, marking time that no longer belonged to us. Emily came running out of her room, holding the same teddy bear. "Grandma, why does this toy smell like Dad's cologne?" I froze. "Maybe because he loved you so much, sweetheart." She smiled and went back to bed, but her question stayed with me long after. Kids sense what adults bury. Later that week, Marissa suggested we donate David's things. It's time, she said gently. He'd want us to move on. Move on. Two words that sound merciful until you realize how violent they are. Move on from who? From love? From truth? I told her I wasn't ready, and she nodded, too quickly. I saw relief in her eyes, not sorrow. That night, after she and Emily went to sleep, I sat by the window, watching the moonlight pour over the garden David used to tend. Every plant was still growing, stubbornly alive, even without him. I envied them for that. The next morning, I made coffee for Marissa. I wanted to ask her straight out, what was David afraid of? But when she looked up from her mug and smiled that polite, exhausted smile, my courage slipped away. Instead, I asked if she wanted more sugar. That's the curse of being 70. You start choosing silence because it feels safer than confrontation. But silence doesn't protect you. It eats you alive, one quiet breakfast at a time. I went back to the letter that afternoon, tracing the lines of my son's handwriting. There was a small stain near the corner. Coffee, maybe tears. He'd written those words for me, trusting that someday I'd find them. And I had. But what was I supposed to do with them? If I searched for the truth, I might destroy what little family I had left. If I didn't, I'd live every day knowing my son's last message was begging to be finished. That's the thing about love at my age. It isn't about protecting yourself anymore. It's about deciding what's worth breaking for. So I folded the letter again, placed it in the drawer beside my bed, and whispered, "Not yet." Outside, I could hear Emily laughing in the yard, her voice pure and bright. For now, that had to be enough. But deep down, I knew this quiet house wasn't peaceful. It was holding its breath, waiting for me to find the courage to exhale. If you've ever lived with a question you were too afraid to ask, you'll understand. And if this story feels close to your heart, share it. Maybe someone else out there needs to know they're not alone. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for the next chapter, because sometimes the smallest truth can change everything. The letter had ended mid-sentence, right where my son's handwriting started to shake. I traced the line with my finger, whispering the words like a prayer. "Mom, if you ever read this, it means I never made it back." And then, nothing. No goodbye, no explanation. Just a white page and the sound of my own pulse. I sat there for hours, staring at the paper, hoping if I looked long enough, the rest would appear. Maybe there was another page. Maybe he didn't mean to stop. But deep down, I knew. Someone else had ended it for him. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak in the house sounded like footsteps. Every shadow felt like it was holding its breath. Marissa's door was closed. I could hear her voice through the wall, quiet, controlled, talking to someone. I pressed my ear closer. A man's voice answered. Not David's. Not anyone from the family. I froze. "He said he'd handle it," the man whispered. "You just keep quiet. Keep quiet." Two words that sank straight into me. The next morning, I waited until they left for school and work. Then I opened David's old desk. Most drawers were empty, but the bottom one, locked. I found the key taped under his chair, like he wanted me to find it someday. Inside was a dusty laptop, heavier than I remembered, with a yellow sticky note on the lid. "Don't trust what you can't prove." I charged it, hands trembling. The screen lit up password protected. I tried birthdays, anniversaries, even Emily's name. Nothing. Until I typed for Mom. It opened. There were only 3 folders. one named insurance, one audio, and one photos. I clicked the first. Scans of documents. An updated policy dated just a week before he died. The beneficiary's name wasn't his wife. It was blank. My throat tightened. Who leaves the name blank on their life insurance? Then I opened audio. The first file was short, static, then his voice. If something happens, tell Mom I tried. The second was longer. I could hear arguing in the background. Marissa's voice, sharp. You can't just walk away now, David. Then him, calm but firm. I'm not part of this anymore. I can't. A pause. Then a third voice, male, low, cold. You talk, and you'll ruin her too. The recording cut off. I felt the room tilt. I pressed replay, listening again and again until I could hear every breath, every crack in his tone. My son had been afraid. Outside, the afternoon light was fading, and I could see my reflection in the dark screen. An old woman with shaking hands, holding the only voice of her child left in the world. When Marissa came home, she found me sitting at the table with the laptop closed. She looked at me, searching my face. Rough day? She asked softly. I forced a smile. Just tired. She nodded, poured herself a glass of wine, and changed the subject. But I noticed the way her hand lingered on the back of the chair where David used to sit. That small, unconscious touch said more than any words could. That night, I sat on the porch with a blanket around my shoulders and the laptop beside me. The moon hung low, yellow, and heavy. I played the last recording again, this time turning the volume up. A faint sound I hadn't noticed before slipped through. The clicking of a lighter, a door shutting, and someone saying, "You'll thank me someday." I whispered to the dark, "For what?" In that moment, something in me shifted. I realized that if I stayed quiet, if I chose peace over truth, David's fear, his silence, would die with me. And maybe that was what Marissa wanted. Not cruelty, but control. Control of what stayed buried. The next morning, I called the insurance company. The woman on the line was polite until I gave her my son's policy number. Then her tone changed. "Ma'am," she said carefully, "that claim was canceled before payment. There were irregularities." Irregularities, the kind of word that hides more than it reveals. After I hung up, I went back to the laptop and opened the last folder, photos. Most were family pictures, but one stopped me. It was a photo of David standing outside a small diner with a man I didn't recognize. In the corner, a date stamp, 2 days before the accident. The same day Marissa told me he was homesick. Everything I thought I knew about my family started to crumble. That night, I dreamt of David sitting at our kitchen table, writing that unfinished letter. He looked up at me, his face calm but tired. "Mom," he said, "don't let them silence me." When I woke up, I could still feel the warmth of his hand on mine. It's strange how grief can turn into resolve. I wasn't scared anymore. I was angry, not just at Marissa, not even at the man in the recording, but at myself for choosing silence for so long. I went to Emily's room before she woke up for school. She was sleeping with that same stuffed bear, the one that hid her father's letter. I brushed a strand of hair from her forehead and whispered, "I'll find out the truth, baby, for him and for you." As I walked down the hall, I caught my reflection again. This time, I didn't see an old woman lost in grief. I saw someone with purpose. David had left me a trail, and I was finally ready to follow it. If you've ever found something that didn't make sense, something small but haunting, don't ignore it. Sometimes it's not just a coincidence. It's a whisper, asking you to look closer. The next morning, I walked across the street to Walter's porch, the one with the squeaky swing and the smell of old tobacco. He'd been my neighbor for 40 years, once a detective back when small towns still had secrets worth whispering about. I hadn't seen him much since David's funeral. When he opened the door, he looked at me like he already knew why I'd come. "Morning, Luce," he said, pulling the screen door open. "You finally decided to stop pretending you sleep at night?" I smiled faintly. You always could read people too well. We sat at his kitchen table, 2 old cups of coffee between us. I handed him the letter and the USB from David's laptop. He put on his glasses, leaned close. Insurance policy, unsigned beneficiary. "This doesn't smell right," he murmured. "I know," my voice cracked. "But I need to be wrong, Walter. Please tell me I'm wrong." He sighed, ran a hand through his thin gray hair. "You want the truth, not comfort. That's what scares you." We spent hours combing through every word David had left behind. Walter still had friends at the station, and by evening, he'd pulled up the official report from David's accident. "Single vehicle crash," he read aloud. "No signs of foul play. Toxicology clean. Closed case." "But look," he said, tapping the page. "Policy renewed 6 days before the crash. That means someone made sure the paperwork was in order. Someone who knew what was coming." My stomach turned cold. I remembered Marissa mentioning a business trip David canceled that same week. He said he needed time to think, she'd told me. I'd believed her. Walter leaned back, watching me carefully. "Lucille, people don't take out a new life insurance policy when they're planning for forever." I looked at the stack of papers, the recordings, the photographs. Everything I had left of my son felt like evidence instead of memories. "I keep hoping there's a simple explanation," I whispered. "There rarely is," he said softly. "But that's what love does. It keeps us from seeing the storm until it's right over our heads." The next day, we drove to the county records office. The clerk recognized Walter immediately. Apparently, once a detective, always a detective. We requested David's full file. The woman handed us a thin envelope. Too thin. Walter frowned. "Where's the scene report?" She glanced around, lowered her voice. It was marked confidential. Someone requested it sealed. Family authorization. My heart sank. Family? But I never... She hesitated. It was signed by his wife. I stood there frozen, the edges of the counter digging into my palms. Why would she seal it? I asked, already knowing the answer I didn't want. Walter placed a hand on my shoulder. "Because there's something in it she doesn't want anyone reading." When we got back to his house, we sat in silence for a long time. The only sound was the old clock ticking above the stove. Finally, Walter said, "I can get a copy through another route. Might take a few days." "Do it," I said. My voice didn't sound like my own anymore. That night, I went home and watched Marissa tuck Emily into bed. She was gentle, patient, humming a song I hadn't heard since David was a child. For a moment, she looked almost innocent, someone trying her best. But the thought of that sealed report sat heavy in my chest. When she came into the kitchen later, I asked, "Do you remember when David renewed his insurance?" She paused, then smiled. "Of course. He was being responsible. You know how he was." I nodded, pretending to agree. But in her eyes, I saw a flicker. Just a split-second flash of something between fear and guilt. After she went upstairs, I sat alone in the dark, listening to the creaks of the house settling. It hit me then, love can make you blind, but suspicion? never sleeps. The next morning, Walter called. Got something. Meet me at the diner in an hour. He had a copy of a security photo from the gas station near the crash site. The timestamp was 20 minutes before the accident. 2 people in the car, David, and someone in the passenger seat wearing a light coat. The face wasn't clear. Could it be Marissa? He asked. I swallowed hard. Maybe. Or someone else she sent. Walter looked at me, his expression grave. Lucille, if we go further down this road, you won't be able to go back to the version of her you think you know. I stared out the window, watching rain streak across the glass. Then I guess it's time I stopped pretending. When I got home, Marissa was folding laundry, humming again. I looked at her, really looked, and wondered how many masks one person could wear without breaking. That night, I replayed David's recordings once more, this time through Walter's software. A new fragment appeared at the end of one file, barely audible. David's voice trembling. If anything happens, tell Mom to look at the contract. The contract, not the letter, not the insurance, the contract. I grabbed the stack of files Walter had given me, flipping through each page until I found it. David's signature beside an unfamiliar name. A co-signer. Someone named E. Torres. I whispered the name out loud. It meant nothing to me then, but it would soon. For the first time in weeks, I felt both terrified and alive. The kind of fear that comes when you realize truth isn't far away. It's right at your doorstep, waiting for you to open the door. It happened on a Tuesday, ordinary in every way until it wasn't. Emily had been playing tag at recess when she tripped and hit her head. The school called, panic in their voices, and I met Marissa at the hospital. Emily was fine, just a small cut, but the doctor needed blood work for routine checks, he said. I remember thinking how calm Marissa looked. Too calm. A few days later, the nurse called. Mrs. Grant, she said, there's a small discrepancy with the records. Nothing alarming. We just need a quick confirmation of the parents' blood types. I told her. Mine was O. David's was B. She hesitated, then said gently, That's odd. The child's results make that genetically impossible. Genetically impossible. Those words echoed all night. I didn't tell Marissa. I didn't even tell Walter. I just sat at the kitchen table, staring at David's photo, whispering, What were you trying to tell me, son? The next morning, I went to the hospital myself, pretending to check on Emily's recovery. When the nurse handed me the file, I saw it in black and white. Emily's blood type didn't match. No way she was David's biological child. I left the hospital with my heart pounding, the folder heavy in my hand like a loaded gun. I walked for blocks before realizing where my feet were taking me, straight to Walter's. He opened the door and froze when he saw my face. What happened? I handed him the folder. He read silently, then looked up. You're sure this is right? I nodded. They ran it twice. He exhaled slowly. Lucille, this changes everything. I know, I said, but I can't. My voice broke. I can't destroy that little girl's world. She believes David was her father. Walter leaned forward. What if keeping quiet destroys something bigger? What if the truth dies with you? I wanted to scream at him, but I couldn't because I knew he was right. That night, I sat by Emily's bed. She was coloring under the nightlight, her small hands steady, her smile too pure for the ugliness waiting outside that door. Grandma, she said suddenly, Dad told me once that, if I was brave, he'd come back. My breath caught. When did he say that, sweetheart? The night before he went away, he hugged me real tight and said, "If you're brave, you'll find me again." Her words hit me like a whisper from the grave. Brave. That's what I wasn't. When she fell asleep, I went into the attic. I hadn't opened David's boxes since the funeral. Inside one, labeled personal, I found another envelope, this one sealed with his handwriting. But when I opened it, there was only a blank form for a DNA test and his signature at the bottom. He'd been planning to take one. I sank to the floor, sobbing. My son had known. He'd been preparing to prove something, and he never got the chance. The next morning, I confronted Marissa. She was standing at the sink, rinsing dishes, humming that same gentle tune. I placed the hospital file on the counter. She went pale. "Where did you get that?" "Emily's records," I said quietly. "Explain it." Her hands trembled, then steadied. "You're mistaken." "Don't lie to me," I said, my voice shaking. "You've been lying long enough." She looked at me with something I hadn't seen before. Fear. Not of me, but of the truth itself. "You don't understand," she whispered. David wouldn't stop asking questions. He said he wanted a test to clear everything up, but he didn't know how deep it went. I took a step closer. How deep what went? She looked away. "If you love Emily, let it go. Please, let it go." I left before I did something I'd regret. But when I got outside, the cold air burned my lungs. I realized that silence wasn't protection anymore. It was poison. That night, I placed the DNA form, the hospital records, and David's letter on the table. The pieces of a puzzle no one wanted to finish. I thought about my son's words. "Don't trust what you can't prove," Walter called later. "Did you talk to her?" "Yes," I said quietly. "And?" "She's hiding something. But it's not just guilt, it's fear," he sighed. "Then we keep going. There's more under this surface." When we hung up, I sat in the dark, listening to the clock tick. My reflection in the window looked unfamiliar. Older, harder, determined. For the first time, I felt what David must have felt before he died. The weight of knowing the truth could destroy everything you love, and still deciding to face it. I touched the letter one last time and whispered, "I'll finish this for you." Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the smell of rain. Somewhere down the hall, Emily stirred in her sleep and murmured, "Dad." And just like that, the house didn't feel quiet anymore. It felt like it was holding its breath again, waiting for the truth to finally speak. Walter called just after dawn. His voice sounded different, tight, cautious. "Lucille," he said, "you need to come over. I found something." When I got there, his curtains were drawn, the light from his old desk lamp spilling over stacks of paper. He slid a small black phone across the table. "It was in David's cloud backup," he said, "encrypted. Took all night to decode." The screen flickered. A file name appeared. Final recording. April 17th. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Walter pressed play. Static, then breathing. Then David's voice, quiet but trembling. "You promised, Marissa. You said no one would get hurt." A pause. Marissa's voice, sharp as glass. "And you promised to keep your mouth shut. But you can't, can you?" David again, louder now. "This isn't about me anymore. That money, it's not yours. It belongs to someone else." Then another voice, deeper, male. The same one I'd heard in the earlier recordings. "You walk out that door, David, and they'll know what you did to her." Silence. Then footsteps, then the sound of the phone hitting the floor. The recording cut off. I felt my stomach twist. What he did to her? Who's her? Walter leaned back, rubbing his temples. That's the question. Whoever she was, this isn't just about money. It's about someone who's gone. I looked at the screen again, replaying those words in my mind. They'll know what you did to her. For the first time, it wasn't just grief I felt. It was fear. Walter opened another file. A transfer record. David's insurance money wired to an account under a different name. Not Marissa's, not anyone we knew. E. Torres, Walter read aloud. Does that name mean anything to you? I shook my head. No, but David mentioned a friend in his letter. Someone who warned him. Walter looked at me with that old detective stare. Maybe that friend wasn't warning him. Maybe it was the person he was trying to protect. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing David's voice, the edge of fear in it, the way he said someone else. I went into Emily's room, stood by her bed. She was dreaming, softly murmuring something I couldn't make out. For a moment, I wondered if the sins of the past could seep into a child's sleep like whispers through the walls. When I went back downstairs, Marissa was still awake, sitting on the couch with a glass of wine. The TV was on, but muted. She looked up and smiled too quickly. You scared me, she said. I sat across from her. Marissa, do you know someone named Torres? The color drained from her face before she could hide it. Where did you hear that? David mentioned it. And now, I've seen the name again. In his records. She swallowed hard. Lucille, please, don't dig anymore. Her voice cracked just a little, enough to make me hesitate. Why not? I asked. If there's something I should know, something about David, why can't you just tell me? She stared into her glass. Because the truth doesn't bring him back. It just ruins whoever's left. And then she got up, went to bed, leaving me with nothing but that sentence and the sound of her door clicking shut. The next day, Walter called again. I looked up Torres, he said. There was a woman, Anna Torres, worked at the same clinic where Marissa volunteered. She died in a fire 3 years ago. I felt my pulse quicken. A fire? Yeah. Officially ruled an accident, but there's more. She had a newborn at the time. My throat tightened. What happened to the baby? He hesitated. The report says the infant didn't survive, but I could hear it in his tone. He wasn't sure. I hung up, hands shaking, the phone heavy as lead. My mind was spinning, connecting dots I didn't want to connect. David's secrecy, Marissa's fear, Emily's mismatched DNA. I went to the window. Outside, Emily was playing with her dollhouse, sunlight on her hair. She looked so much like David when he was little that my heart ached. But now, I wasn't sure what part of her belonged to him anymore. That night, I pulled out the phone again and replayed the recording. I listened closer this time, past the shouting, the static. And then, in the background, barely audible, a faint cry. A baby's cry. I gasped. How could I have missed it before? Walter confirmed it the next day. I ran the audio through a filter. You're right. There's an infant in that room. The timestamp matches the week Anna Torres died. I sank into a chair, trembling. So, David was there? With her? Looks like it, Walter said quietly. And Marissa knew. For a long time, I didn't say anything. My son had been living with a truth he couldn't carry. Marissa had been guarding a secret she couldn't destroy. And a woman, somewhere, had lost her life in the middle of it all. But the worst part? A child might have lived. When I hung up, the house felt colder than it ever had. Marissa was in the kitchen, packing Emily's lunch for the next day. I watched her from the doorway, her movements careful, practiced, like someone trying to hold a life together that wasn't really hers. She looked up and smiled. "You're quiet today." I forced a smile back, just thinking about David. She nodded softly. He always thought too much, too. For the rest of the night, I said nothing, because deep down, I knew this story wasn't about betrayal anymore. It was about survival. If you've ever kept a secret thinking it would protect someone, ask yourself, who is it really protecting? Walter and I drove to the city hospital that afternoon. The wind was sharp, slicing through the silence between us. I clutched David's old folder on my lap, the one labeled Confidential Records. Walter had managed to get us access to the archived files from the year of David's accident. Inside, the hospital smelled the same as every hospital: cold, sterile, full of memories you never asked to keep. The clerk at the records desk was young, polite. She scanned the documents, frowned slightly, and said, "There's something odd here." 2 patients tied to the same birth date. One was listed as stillborn, Marissa Grant's infant. The other was a baby transferred to our neonatal ward under the name Baby Girl Torres. I felt my heart stop. "Torres?" I whispered. The clerk nodded. "Anna Torres. She died the same night. House fire. The baby survived and was later released to her next of kin." I looked at Walter. He didn't need to say anything. We both knew what that meant. I stepped outside for air, gripping the railing until my knuckles turned white. My son, my David, hadn't lied. He hadn't betrayed anyone. He'd tried to save them both. Back at Walter's car, he turned the engine off and said softly, "Lucille, if this is true, then Emily. She's Anna's daughter," I said quietly, "not Marissa's. David must have known. Maybe he switched the babies to protect her from losing everything." Walter nodded slowly, and when he decided to come clean, Marissa couldn't let him. I finished. The truth was, like a knife now, carving through years of illusion. That night, I watched Marissa reading Emily a bedtime story. Her voice was gentle, trembling a little at the edges. For a moment, she wasn't a liar or a thief. She was a woman holding on to the only piece of love she had left. And that made it worse. After Emily fell asleep, I confronted her. No anger, no shouting this time, just exhaustion. "I went to the hospital," I said. "I know about Anna." She froze, her face drained of color. Then she whispered, "Please, Lucille. Don't." "Don't what?" I asked softly. "Don't say her name? Don't speak the truth that's already screaming inside this house?" She sat down, buried her face in her hands. "You don't understand," she said through tears. "I lost my baby. He was all I had left of David. When Anna died, and that child was alone, David said it was fate. He said maybe God gave us a second chance." I stared at her, stunned. "And you agreed to it?" She lifted her head, eyes red. "I didn't agree. I just didn't stop him. I thought it would heal us. But when he wanted to tell the truth, I panicked. I told him he'd destroy everything." Her voice cracked. "The night he died, we fought. He said he was going to confess. To everyone. I begged him not to drive, but he left anyway. I felt tears spill down my cheeks before I realized I was crying. So, it was an accident?" She shook her head slowly. "No, it was guilt. He couldn't live with what we'd done." The room went silent except for the soft hum of the refrigerator. Somewhere upstairs, Emily stirred in her sleep. For the first time, I didn't feel anger. I felt pity. Marissa wasn't a monster. She was a mother who made a terrible bargain with grief. I stood there for a long time, looking at the woman who had both broken and protected what was left of my family. Finally, I said quietly, "You didn't just steal another woman's child, Marissa. You stole her story. But I suppose that's what grief does. It makes thieves of us all." She didn't answer, just nodded, sobbing quietly into her hands. Later that night, I walked into Emily's room. She was dreaming again, her small fingers clutching the edge of her blanket. I sat beside her and brushed the hair from her forehead. If I told her the truth, I would destroy everything she believed about her parents. But if I stayed silent, I would be no better than the ones who built this lie. David's words echoed in my mind. If you're brave, you'll find me again. Maybe bravery didn't mean chasing justice. Maybe it meant carrying the truth without letting it harden your heart. The next morning, Walter stopped by. He looked at me, then at the folder on the table. "You're going to the police." I hesitated, staring at the sunlight spilling through the curtains. "I have to, but not for revenge. For him. For the woman whose name no one remembered." Walter nodded. "You've always been stronger than you think." When he left, I looked once more at Marissa's closed bedroom door. Inside, I heard her crying softly. Not the cry of guilt, but of someone finally breaking open. And, for the first time, I understood. Not every villain starts out cruel. Some are just people who couldn't bear to lose love twice. If you've ever learned something that shattered your anger into compassion, you know what this feels like. Sometimes forgiveness doesn't come after justice. It comes because the truth leaves no one standing tall. The morning Marissa was arrested, the sky looked almost too calm, like the world didn't want to admit something terrible had just ended. 2 police cars waited outside the house, their lights flickering against the old maple tree David planted years ago. Emily stood at the window, holding her stuffed bear, asking why everyone was shouting. I told her it was just grown-up stuff, but my throat burned on every word. Inside, Marissa sat at the kitchen table, her wrist trembling as the officer read her rights. She wasn't angry. She wasn't even fighting. Just tired. Like she'd already spent all her strength holding that secret for too long. When they asked if she had anything to say, she looked at me. "I was just trying to protect her from the truth," she whispered. Her voice cracked on that last word. Truth. I wanted to hate her. God knows I tried. But all I could see was the same woman who used to sing lullabies to Emily, the one who sat by David's bed in the hospital, whispering apologies he never got to answer. When they let her out, Emily ran to the door. "Mommy?" I knelt down and caught her before she reached the porch. "Sweetheart," I said softly, "Mommy has to go away for a little while." She looked at me with those wide, searching eyes that reminded me so much of David. Did she do something bad? I froze. How do you explain sin and sacrifice to a child who still believes every grown-up tells the truth? I stroked her hair and said the only thing I could. Your father loved you more than life itself. That's what matters. That night, the house was too quiet. I walked through each room, touching the walls like they were old friends I had to say goodbye to. Every picture, every memory. It all felt heavier now, tainted by everything we had uncovered. Walter stopped by later, standing in the doorway with that same sad look he'd had since the day we found the recordings. You did the right thing, he said quietly. I nodded, though the words didn't feel like comfort. Then why does it hurt so much? Because justice isn't the same as peace, he said. Sometimes they don't live in the same house. He was right. I'd told the truth, handed over the files, the recordings, the DNA reports. I'd done what a mother should do. For her son, for Anna, for the woman whose child was taken and whose name had been erased. But it didn't feel like victory. It felt like burying love all over again. The next morning, Emily woke early. She climbed into my bed, curled up beside me, and whispered, "Grandma, do you think Daddy can see us?" I swallowed the lump in my throat. I think he never stopped. She smiled faintly and fell back asleep, her small hand resting over my heart. And in that moment, I realized something. The truth had broken us, yes, but it had also freed us from the lie that had been quietly killing us for years. Marissa's trial moved fast. The court called it fraud and tampering, words that sounded sterile compared to what it really was. A woman, drowning in grief, clinging to a child that wasn't hers. I sat through every hearing, my hands folded in my lap, watching her shrink under the weight of her own choices. When the verdict was read, she didn't look at anyone except me. There was no hatred in her eyes, no defiance. Just regret. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed around me, throwing questions like stones. "Do you forgive her? Will you tell the girl the truth?" I said nothing. Forgiveness isn't something you announce. It's something that grows quietly, the way grass pushes through cracks in the concrete after a storm. That evening, I took Emily to the lake. It was the same spot where David proposed to Marissa years ago, before everything unraveled. The water was calm, the air still. She tossed a pebble into the lake and said, "Daddy said ripples are like people. Even when they fade, they still touch everything." I smiled through tears. He was right, honey. He always was. For the first time in months, I let myself breathe. The lies were gone. The pain was still there, yes, but it finally had somewhere to go, somewhere honest. That night, I wrote in my journal, "Justice was served, but peace. Peace takes its time." I closed the book, placed it beside David's letter, and looked out the window one last time. The moonlight spilled across the garden where he used to plant sunflowers with Emily. It glowed soft and silver, like forgiveness taking its first breath. If you've ever carried a truth too heavy to tell, maybe you understand. Sometimes silence feels like love, but real love, the kind that heals, demands we finally speak. So, if this story reached you, if you've ever chosen peace over truth, or truth over peace, remember, both have their price, and both, somehow, can lead you home. 20 years later, I still remember the sound of that house, the creak of the old stairs, the wind brushing through the curtains, and Grandma Lucille's soft hum when she thought no one was listening. I didn't understand then what she carried inside her. Now, as a therapist, I think about her every time someone sits in front of me, trembling, asking how to forgive what feels unforgivable. I tell them this story, not as a tragedy, but as proof that silence, too, can love you and hurt you at the same time. I was 8 when my mother went away. They said it was for grown-up reasons, but children always know when something is wrong. Grandma never told me the details. She just said, "Your father loved you more than life, and that's all you ever need to remember." For years, that sentence was enough. But when I turned 18, Grandma passed away. While sorting through her things, I found an envelope inside a book of poetry. David's letter, the one she'd once found hidden in my old teddy bear. The paper was yellowed, the ink faded, but the words still carried warmth. "If you're reading this, Mom, I hope you remember that love can make people do foolish things. Don't hate them for it. Just make sure the truth doesn't die with me. I must have read that line 100 times. It didn't sound like guilt. It sounded like mercy. Years later, when I started working as a counselor, I met people like him, people crushed by the weight of secrets they thought would protect someone else. Mothers who hid the truth about lost children. Husbands who lied to save marriages already breaking. Daughters who pretended not to know because knowing meant hurting the ones they loved. I realized then that we're all a little like my family, trying to build peace on the ruins of silence. Sometimes, during lectures, I show my students a small wooden box. Inside is that same letter. I tell them it's a reminder that healing doesn't always come from punishment. It comes from understanding why people fall in the first place. I remember one student asking, "Do you hate her? The woman who lied to you?" I smiled. "No," I said. "The woman who raised me wasn't my mother by blood, but she taught me how to forgive. And I mean that. Because forgiveness, I've learned, isn't something you give to the person who hurt you. It's something you give to yourself, so you can stop living in the moment they broke your heart." Sometimes I still dream about that old house, Grandma in her garden humming softly, my father's voice echoing faintly through the hall. Even Marissa, my mother, appears sometimes, sitting by the window, whispering lullabies I almost remember. In those dreams, no one is angry anymore. Everyone just understands. The past doesn't vanish. It becomes a language you learn to live with. Every year, on my father's birthday, I take Emily, my daughter, to that lake where Grandma used to take me. I tell her the story, piece by piece, not to burden her, but to remind her that truth, even when painful, is never the enemy. Lies rot the heart. Truth teaches it how to breathe again. She listens carefully, her hand in mine, and always asks the same question. "Grandma Lucille, was she happy?" And I always answer the same way. She was at peace, and that's even better. Now, as I close each session, I tell my patients, you can't rewrite the beginning, but you can choose the ending. My family's story began with silence, but it didn't have to end there, because somewhere between love and truth, between grief and grace, there's a small space where forgiveness takes its first breath, and that's where healing begins. So if you've ever inherited someone else's pain, or carried a secret that wasn't yours to keep, let this story be a reminder. You don't have to pass it down. You can end it right here, right now, with understanding. I wrote this letter on a quiet Sunday morning, the kind Grandma used to call a day for remembering. My daughter was sitting at the kitchen table, drawing a picture of a tree. I asked her what kind it was, and she said, "It's a family tree, but I'm still figuring out where everyone goes." I smiled. I guess that's what I've been doing my whole life, trying to figure out where everyone belongs. "Grandma," I finally told her. I told my daughter who her real great-grandfather was. I told her about David, my father, how he was brave, gentle, and flawed, and how he carried a love so big it nearly broke him. I told her how you fought for the truth, even when it cost you your peace. She listened quietly. Then she asked, "Was he a good man?" And I said, "He tried to be." Because that's all any of us can do, isn't it? She didn't cry. She just looked at me, thoughtful, and said, "Then love runs in our family." That's when I realized something. You weren't trying to erase the past, Grandma. You were protecting the part of it that was still worth saving. You knew some truths are meant to stay buried until the world is ready to understand them. After she went to bed, I took out the old blanket you stitched for me when I was little. The one with the tiny, uneven threads. The secret pocket in the corner. I slipped this letter inside, right where your hands once hid my father's. I wanted to say thank you for everything, for raising me with patience when you could have raised me with anger, for teaching me that forgiveness isn't weakness, it's courage in slow motion, for reminding me that love, even when tangled in lies, can still heal what truth alone can't. I've spent years helping others make peace with their pain, and every time someone whispers, "I can't forgive," I think of you. I tell them that forgiveness doesn't erase what happened. It just stops it from owning you. The world has changed since you left, Grandma. People talk more about mental health, about generational wounds, about truth and healing. Sometimes, when I see a family sitting in my office, parents and children holding hands but not quite sure how to talk, I think, if only they could see what silence costs. That's why I told her. I didn't want our silence to become her inheritance. Now, when I walk past your old house, I can almost hear your voice again. I imagine you humming, watering the garden, waiting for the kettle to whistle. Maybe you'd smile, knowing that your story didn't end in tragedy, but in understanding. I hope you know that what you started, the search for truth, the courage to face it, didn't die with you. It became part of me, part of her. Maybe that's how love works. It doesn't vanish. It just finds a new voice. I'll leave this letter here, under the same blanket where everything began. Not to hide it, but to honor it. Because some secrets aren't meant to disappear. They are meant to remind us where we came from. And if anyone ever finds this years from now, I hope they read it and feel what I feel now, that healing isn't about forgetting. It's about remembering differently. Grandma, you once told me, the heart has its own way of telling the truth. I understand now. Some secrets are born to protect. Others are meant to set us free. And this one, this love that survived everything, it set me free. If you've ever held on to a truth you were afraid to tell, maybe it's time. Because sometimes the truth isn't what breaks us. It's what finally lets us breathe. And if this story reached you today, share it, pass it on, or tell someone you love them. Because love, when it's brave, always finds its way home.